Good morning. Welcome to episode 107 of the Driller Newscast, a weekly update on the news and stories impacting the construction, drilling, and groundwater industry. I'm your host, Brock Yorty, and this week's episode is brought to us by our friends at Grundfos. Grundfos leads the charge in revolutionizing water management. Collaborating with stakeholders worldwide, Grundfos engineers intelligent, sustainable pumping and solar-powered solutions. Together, Grundfos optimizes water management across the entire cycle, shaping a brighter, water-secure future. Thanks, Team Grundfos. We appreciate your support of the Driller Newscast. We have an excellent episode this week. We're going to start by talking about the PFAS webinar that's happening tomorrow, April 30th. You better get signed up, everybody. Next, the Department of Interior has released $95 million for water resources, ecosystem health, and communities impacted by climate change. Our feature this week is an interview with hydrogeologist Stuart Smith. We're going to talk about his work with Groundwater Tanzania and the importance of sharing our water knowledge with water-stressed countries. With a very busy episode, I'm just going to give you a safety challenge right now. In 2 days, it'll be May. May is Fall Awareness Safety Month. And next week, May 6th through the 10th, is the safety stand down for falls and fatalities. Drillers, construction operators, I want you to think about how often we're at risk. Start building these tailgate talks now. I want you to identify the risks, the hazards, what processes we have in place, how we should be inspecting our fall arrest systems and our ladders, and all the near misses that have come up with a good plan, because it's unacceptable. And I even want you to think about slips, trips, and falls, and anything over 4 feet being a hazard that we need to have the proper processes in place. All right, let's get into some great news. This week in the news, we're going to start with the last minute notice. There's an EPA PFAS webinar happening on April 30th. That's tomorrow, from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern, as part of its effort to communicate the latest information on the federal final rule that sets drinking water standards for 5 individual per and polyfluoroalkyl alkyl substances, including PFAS, PFOA, PFNA, PFHXS, and HFPO-DA. The Environmental Protection Agency has scheduled a free webinar on this topic that will happen April 30th from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern. The PFAS rule was finalized on April 10th, 2024, and the EPA webinar is scheduled to cover 2 topics, including an overview of the drinking water regulation and treatment process for removing PFAS compounds from drinking water. In addition, a question and answer session is scheduled to be held from 3 to 3:30. Ashley Green of the EPA's Office of Water is scheduled to provide the overview of the final PFAS rulings, which is the National Primary Drinking Water Regulation, and will cover key regulatory requirements, timing for water systems and drinking water primary agencies to comply with these requirements, background on the regulations and development, and funding information to support the implementation of these rules. This is big, everybody. And the next one that we will see come out will be later this summer. So I want you to consider jumping on this, because the next one is August 27th. We have to be very diligent in seeing how all of these things have come out from 4 parts per trillion to 10 parts per trillion. And it's happening fast, though it's been a very long time in the making. Next, this is big news from the Department of Interior, as they released $95 million for water resource, ecosystem health, and for communities facing drought and other climate change impacts. At the National Conference of Ecosystem Restoration in Albuquerque last month, Secretary of Interior Haaland announced the availability of up to $95 million through the President Biden's Investing in America agenda for projects to bolster water resources, advance ecosystem health, and support resilience in communities facing drought and other climate change impacts. Here's a quote from Secretary Haaland. Nature is our best ally in the fight against climate change. And now, through President Biden's Investing in America agenda, we have new transformational resources to advance locally led, partnership driven projects that will catalyze nature based solutions and build resilient communities and landscapes. As communities across the West continue to face the impacts of prolonged and worsening drought, these collaborative projects will enhance watershed health and conservation throughout the Southwest desert ecosystem. This funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law will help support water conservation and efficiency projects, water management and infrastructure improvements, river and watershed restoration, and nature-based solution projects that provide significant ecological benefits while providing critical adaptation support for communities facing climate catastrophes. Another quote, reclamation will continue to work collaboratively with stakeholders to leverage this once-in-a-generation investment from the Biden-Harris administration to benefit ecosystem health and water resources. This comes from the Bureau of Reclamation Commissioner Touton. These resources will invest in projects that will advance water conservation and efficiency while improving watershed and other ecological benefits. This is huge, everybody. You know, we've seen with the infrastructure law, there's been an investment of $8.3 billion over the next 5 years for water infrastructure projects, including rural water. Come on, drillers, get on top of this. Water storage, conservation, and conveyance. We just saw a massive discussion over the Ogallala that happened last month, and Kansas talking about how important that resource is. Onto these nature-based solutions, dam safety, water purification and reuse, seeing that with Colorado and California and many other states jumping on board, and of course, desalination. Over the last 2 years, the Bureau of Reclamation has selected 430 projects to receive $3 billion. It's a great time to be in the groundwater industry, and we really need to be watching these infrastructure projects and getting involved. Finally, this piece of the news leads into part 1 of the feature interview with Stuart Smith, an Ohio native, former NGWA education staff member, worked with Kathy Butcher, the legend. He's also a hydrogeologist and an epic knowledge sharer who has focused his time in the past 12 years working alongside his partner in Tanzania for their company, Groundwater Tanzania. But before we jump to this discussion with Stuart, I want to read to you this statement from the Director General of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. That's the UNESCO. Her team and the UN just released the 2024 Water Development Report. This year's title, Prosperity and Peace. The Director General states, we are currently facing a water crisis that can be seen and felt in a multitude of ways. On the one hand, flooding and submersion hazards are growing. On the other, half of the global population is facing grave water shortages. Between 2002 and 2021, droughts affected more than 1.4 billion people, causing the direct death of nearly 21,000 individuals. She continues, let us state it clearly. This situation could bring about a systemic crisis in our societies. If humanity goes thirsty, fundamental questions on education, health, and sustainable development will be sidelined, eclipsed by the daily struggle for water. This is the crucial dilemma raised by the 2024 United Nations World Water Development Report. This report brings new data to bear on the important debate underlining, first example here, 50% of jobs in high-income countries depend on water, along with a figure that increases to 80% in low-income countries. I want you to think about AI right now, and a query to AI consumes, for 5 queries up to 50, over a quart of water. Continuing with her statement. However, faced with these severe hydraulic challenges, the report also makes proposals to reinforce water education, step up data collection to guide public policies, and increase private investment to ensure more sustainable management of water resources. As our report underlines, universal access to water for drinking, sanitation, and hygiene will require an annual investment of around, in United States dollars, $114 billion until 2030. That it's going to continue to go up, everybody. This is indeed a considerable sum, but the cost of inaction will be significantly higher. Finally, our 2024 report puts international cooperation at the heart of the proposed solutions in line with its theme: water for prosperity and peace. Takes as a starting point a simple fact: rivers, tributaries, lakes, and aquifers know no border. We can see this with last month, everybody. United States Supreme Court heard Texas versus New Mexico and Colorado over the Rio Grande. We'll be covering that more soon. Let's go on with the statement. Aquifers know no borders. For this reason, over the years, water management has more often been a source of cooperation than one of confrontation. Recognizing well-managed and fairly distributed water resources as a driver of peace, UNESCO works on a daily basis to strengthen cooperation on water and promote multilateralism as a response to transnational water use. Think about that, drillers. Transnational water use. Aquifers know no borders. Firstly, UNESCO works to reinforce cross-border cooperation on water. In December 2022, we launched with our partners the Transboundary Water Cooperation Coalition at the first UN Water Summit on groundwater. This ambitious initiative and the project it supports aims to bring together countries around the joint management of aquifers, lakes, and river basins. Thank you, Director General Audrey. This is a big deal, and we need to continue to think about this call for action. Go check out this report. We're going to continue to have pieces of this, but let's jump into an Ohio native, great NGWA member and supporter and knowledge sharer, Stuart Smith, as he talks about his work for the past 12 years with groundwater Tanzania. And this is part 1, since we had such a great conversation. I hope you enjoy. For this week's industry professional, our feature is with a great industry knowledge sharer and advocate for groundwater. I like to call him a friend. We engage on the social media platforms, and there's all kinds of great things happening. It's Stuart Smith. Go ahead and introduce yourself and give us a little background of how long you've been in the groundwater industry.
Well, I'm Stuart Smith. I'm a hydrogeologist, and I'm and actually a kind of a applied microbiologist. Some people know me from the iron bacteria connections in things from way back. Been involved in private practice for quite a while. I got started in the industry when I took a job with what was then the National Water Well Association in 1979, and worked under the legendary Kathy Butcher in the Jay Lear era. And like I say, that's kind of a 3-beer tale in its own right as how's that went. But that took me from being a discouraged high school science teacher to going into education and training in the groundwater industry, realizing that I liked this very much. It also gave me some. I grew up pulling and setting pumps with my dad, and what all that brown and black stuff all over my hands. I got the scientific side of all that. So that's where that started. And then I've been in private practice since 83, in and out. Sometime happen to get a real job here and there, to keep that going. And
Seeing
then,
you go to different water symposiums all over the world and speak, how'd you get into that?
well, a lot of that was through the iron, the biofouling and biocorrosion side of the wells. That's kind of been my niche product. As a company here, we do local hydrogeology, but we're a boutique hydrogeology company in municipal water supply, but then get involved with consulting on the biofouling and biocorrosion side of things and helping the clients understand that and how to respond to it. That's been more the international flavor of what I've done on that part. Yeah.
And then you got the international bug in what's this groundwater Tanzania all about? How'd you get involved in that?
Well, groundwater Tanzania has evolved, I guess you could call it that, or emerged. Sometimes I think of it as that scene from Alien where it pops out of the guy's chest. But well, it started. I'm a Lutheran Christian, and our connections between when we were then in northwestern Ohio, and with the Dodoma Diocese of Tanzania, which is a lot like New Mexico for our American connections. And so water becomes a discussion right away. So started informally consulting on some projects there, and then up and around Kilimanjaro for the Catholics over where we live now. And then I started trying to build a company to manage projects like we do here. But then my partner there, a young man named Naftal Mandi, he said, "Stu, we need to buy a drilling rig because this is the only way we can control what we do." We've had a lot of working there in the water well sector there is very difficult. The logistics are difficult, the maintenance environment is difficult. And so it just so happened we had to finally get into it so we could control the whole flow from the geophysics through the drilling, through the construction of the systems. And that's where we are now we have 2 rig fleets and geophysics, and we employ people to construct the equipment, and we work for government donors and so on. So that last part of it evolved right through COVID. We bought our first rig in 2018, and then it's been and then there was several years there when I wasn't going to be there, and those guys had to make it on their own, except through what we could connect through WhatsApp. And so that's where we are now.
It's wild you mentioned WhatsApp, and you think 12 years ago you've been doing this. There was a piece that came out that I was reading, said in 2010, 4.7 billion people in the world, so 2 out of 3 people in the world had a cell phone. And at the same time, in 2010, 1 out of 3 didn't have access to clean water or sanitation, proper sanitation. And so now here we are, and those same numbers are, we see technology growing, and we see people being able to professionally develop and have better, faster communication, but we still have this major a deficit of people that have water, have clean water, and not.
Yeah. I have a photograph somewhere of sort of illustrate that, like where you have cell service but no clean water. And that's Tanzania to rural Tanzania to a T. It's that there's places out in the remote where you can get a pretty good cell signal. The international cells or mobile phone companies do a pretty good job with that. And but you're looking right at uh, non-functioning water taps, and the wastewater side is worse. As internationally, there's more places with actually something resembling clean water versus they still don't have a proper wastewater, and that's a problem in a place like Tanzania where you have relatively thin soil in places over fractured rock, and they've been digging latrines for, well, what, hundreds of thousands of years? I don't know, 100,000 years for all I know, um, or something, and running cattle. And so the nitrate levels can be high, for example.
Yeah, it's wild when you think of how long we've been impacting Mother Earth, and in good ways and in bad ways. And you talk about trying to get more access to clean water, better systems. And I see you uh, always asking the drilling community, hey, I'm looking for, this tool or this data retrieval device that we can easily use there. What has been the biggest barrier to being able to take what we have here in the States and kind of implement it over there?
Well, yeah, there's several parts to that question. The techniques, of course, translate, and to some degree or another. And also, if you've worked internationally, you realize that Americans and Europeans, for example, sometimes have different ways of viewing how to do things. And the European influence is more strong in East Africa than, us wild cowboy types. But so there's some of that, but we can always employ the techniques here. There's one of the barriers I find is that there's an established way of doing things, and that's not so different than here, but there's an established way of doing things, and it's hard to move somebody off that pin. The best example I can think of is using slotted PVC screens, as that's, and there's a lot of good reasons you do that in places like East Africa. And it's getting screens are expensive. Getting screens to places requires heavy lifting sometimes, and so we have these inefficient wells, even the ones that we put in, that are still there. They like to screen everything clear to the bottom and filter pack it, even if it's in rock. That's a European influence, but it's also wise in some cases because of collapsing formations. So, we have these beautiful rock fractures that are closed off by millimeter slot screens sometimes. And so, it's something we're going to resolve, at least with the municipal customers over time, but that's one example. I think that our domestic manufacturers and suppliers have they have very good markets to work in, and to look at a place like that's exotic and far away and looks kind of puny as a market is probably not as interesting. Whereas the Indians and the Chinese are going to be more likely to take up shop there. For example, our two drilling rigs are PRDs made in India out of international components. They're very, very fine rigs. They've got a good service and supply chain in East Africa, and it's worked out great. I was very skeptical at first, but it's worked out great. So We have domestic PVC screen casing and screen manufacturer in Tanzania. That works great. All our vehicles are of some European or Asian derivation, so that's the way it is there. I'd like to, I would like to see more US components in the market, and that's kind of a drive I'd like to get to, but it's been a matter of getting people to take an interest in it.
It's tough in our industry right now. You look at geotechnical and environmental and even geothermal drilling, and there's a lot of influence on technology, but you start looking at some of the oldest rig manufacturers we have in the country, Georgie failing to what was IR, Copco, now Epiroc. And we're starting to see less and less of the size rigs required for the water wells we want to drill being built. Some because there's plenty of them in the market, but now it's hard. And I see from PRD to Procla to plenty of other rigs around the world that continue. There's lots of rigs out of China right now that are sized to meet the needs of international drilling work. And I look at what you're doing in Tanzania, and you talked about a municipal well, heck, here you start talking to the gurus about municipal water wells, and they're building them to last 80 years. No way we're going to do PVC, or it's going to be 316L stainless, and we're looking at an operational life cycle that fits more of the future. How do you see that there? What's a typical life cycle of a municipal well, or what is the goal?
Well, I think we're beginning to see the end of the life of some of the pioneering municipal wells there, and so we're going to start seeing what that's like. What you're describing, building the 80-year or 100-year well, and then having asset management to go along with that. That's what I've been all about here in the States, and in whatever international work. So what I'm hoping to take that there. We have good connections with the WASAs, the Water and Sanitation Authorities there, and we can get into that. But still, one of our clientele, they had us put in 10-inch diameter PVC for municipal wells in Singida, it's central part of the country. And I guess we'll see how that works out. But, part of it's cost, they look at putting in 10-inch diameter stainless steel and stuff like that. And I don't know where the money comes from, maybe World Bank, and maybe they aren't keen on the expense of something like that. Although now they've been asking for crowdsourcing information on lifespans of wells and stuff like that, which I had replied to that we can tell you from what we know already, but they've got to learn it themselves or something. So anyway, that's the kind of thing, like somebody like myself, I can bring that kind of a perspective into a market like this. If we, but so far we've just been slammed, just keeping ahead of the backlog actually. And so sometimes it's hard to take time to breathe and do something like a seminar or something and talk about advances.
It's tough. And I like that you bring up crowdsourcing, because, a year ago, I covered the Mr. Beast and the 100 wells across Africa. And so groundwater Tanzania, you guys are doing good things. And Africa is a big continent with a lot of water issues from north to south, right? I think, heck, Canada was on fire for what, 7, 8, 9 months last year. And I believe, other than the nuisance of the smoke for most of the American people, we forgot that it was, other things took our attention away. And, you start looking from country to country and all that's happening, and the mining and the wars and whatnot, even the military base in Niger that, I got to help the Red Horse with looking at building that well to versus what's happening today. And it's tough to even consider how you tackle, you know, one
Yeah.
country to another.
I mean, that's the way I looked at it, is I realized that whatever influence I'm gonna have is better concentrated in a spot. I'm not gonna, somebody says, well, how's Africa? I say, I don't know. What do you say about 1 billion people the size of a couple of Russias? So it's a really large place, and it's extremely diverse in all aspects of things. Congo is very different from Tanzania, very different from Kenya in some respects, and Nigeria or whatever. But so that's why I'm kind of focus on the the tip of the spear experience, so to speak. In other words, we realized that if we're going to get done what we needed to get done, we had to build excellence at the point of application. you know, and even there, we've had difficulty. For example, we have to have some water treatment. Fluoride is very high fluoride is a very big problem in places in the north. And so you have to bring in water treatment for that. Then some of the best ways to do that is reverse osmosis. Then you have to figure out what do you do with the concentrate that comes out the other end of it, which is high in fluoride, which you then has to go out in the environment someplace. And then are you making a recycling, or what are you doing with that? Like fluoride water, you can't, there's nothing even really anything you can do with it. It makes terrible concrete. You can't build any concrete out of it or anything. So those are problems there that have to be solved. We're in the middle of a project like that right now. Well, you're going to put an RO in there, but what are you going to do with that? And that's an unresolved question.
And reverse osmosis requires good maintenance program,
Oh yeah,
keeping up with it. You're
yeah.
talking about the life cycle of, what do we do with the effluent,
Hmm.
and it's wild because, as getting to be groundwater professionals and, thinking of the entire planet, then instead of just my little burg in Michigan or you in Ohio, it's like somebody goes, well, we're just going to desalinize, we're going to have this big desalinization plant.
Yeah,
Again, it's my first question is, okay, what do we do with that concentrated,
right.
waste stream? And the same RO, breweries across the United States use it, but it's 3 gallons in, 1 gallon out. That doesn't
Yeah,
seem like the best use for what we're doing.
yeah. It's that's always the question. It always seems to be, well, we'll just make that go away. The coastal ones, they pump that brine back out into the ocean, and that's destructive locally where that goes back out. And nobody seems to care about that. And sometimes, it's like fluoride, for example, is one of those things where there's several technologies, but each of them is bad in their own way. They really are. Like biochar, or there's a chemical reverse um, uh, ion exchange process, and that involves a bunch of nasty chemicals. And so you're either dealing with maintaining this membrane system and you have recharge, or you have somebody has to maintain nasty chemicals also in an environment in an African rural setting, or you try to run it through a giant bone biochar chamber, and like, ooh, I don't know, that sounds nasty. And or you collect a bunch of rainfall, and or there's just a lot of hard choices in some of these places, none of which are particularly good.
Thanks, Stuart. We'll continue this conversation next week on episode 108, including talking about philanthropy money and promoting access to clean water and sanitation. Huge shout out to Team Grumpus for supporting episode 107 of the newscast. Head over to their website. That's grundfos.com, or engage with them on social media. They're always switched on, helping with technical solutions, talking innovations, and promoting the next level of 21st century technology. Fantastic company. Get engaged with them. Head over to thedriller.com. We have great content coming out from our Washington correspondent, our rock star editor-in-chief, onto our columnist team who are bringing us great, relevant content weekly. Everybody, there is a lot happening in the industry right now, from the ramp up of geothermal to water quality standards to the Supreme Court and the Western water battles being a big piece of the national stage. Stay tuned to thedriller.com, our social media. When breaking news happens, we're going to be there. Come back next week. Check out part 2 of the discussion with Stuart Smith. And share this episode, like and subscribe. The newscast is growing every day. We're going to have episode 108 next week. This is wild. Thanks, everybody.